Director Jesse Harger brings us Rendel, Cycle of Revenge. And this 2024 movie is actually a sequel to the 2017 movie Rendel. Now, this is a independent Finnish superhero slash vigilante movie. Think along the lines of Batman or Daredevil and you get an idea here. So Rendel is a vigilante who has a mask permanently fused to his face. He can't talk, but he very much acts like an anti-hero, you know, killing the bad guys. He's not like about putting them in prison or anything like that, but he's definitely overall a good guy. He wants to save the innocent and take down the bad guys, and he faces off against this corporation called VALA. And they are a seemingly legit business who are in various kind of different markets, but that's just a front for criminal activity. And in actual fact, the head of this kind of business is trying to get his hands on this magical sword that will give him powers. And it's up to Rendel, who now has a kind of Batman-style butler, I guess, or helper in regards to this kind of Alfred-style character, as well as a Batcave, all with gadgets and bits and pieces, and even a van, his own vehicle now. And he is trying to take down the VALA Corp and the head of this kind of corporation. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, let's discuss. So the original movie was an independent movie, very much in the style of the 90s kind of style of superhero movies. Think Spawn, The Crow, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that kind of thing. And this movie is very much the same. There is many things here that are comparable to the original movie. So this does feel like a throwback superhero movie, really before the turn of the century. And I would say this is kind of, to put it in a bit more context, this is a cross between like Spawn and Mystery Men, is the best way I would kind of try and describe this. Because this second movie is tries to incorporate a little bit more humour and sort of goofiness into the proceedings, although it still maintains that feel of the original to a degree. Now, one thing I would say, you have to bear in mind, this is not a Hollywood production. This is a movie from Finland, outside of the major kind of studio systems, but it does boast, I think, some pretty good production values. I mean, there is some impressive photography here. There is some quite great kind of fight sequences and stunts. There's a few kind of set pieces, like we have this kind of lorry that explodes and kind of crashes mid-drive, things like that. And just the general presentation of this movie is quite high. If you were to see a still from this movie, or even a trailer, the way it's photographed looks very stylistic. I mean, we have the Rendel character all dressed in black, kind of coming out of the rain and the mist, and with kind of shadow and light behind him. It looks cool. There's no doubt this movie has a kind of cool factor, and the Rendel character himself looks badass. And that's certainly true. And as I said, there is quite a lot of fight scenes here. Quite a lot of kind of stunt work and things like that. The characters are all a little bit kind of over the top. Not just Rendel, but the kind of the bad guys themselves who are sort of over the top sort of characters. And the head bad guy has his own kind of fighting arena where he fights, his henchmen who disagree with him and things like this. So it's very over the top, very, again, I would say, turn of the century in regards to its kind of tone. So if you're a fan of that sort of thing, then you may enjoy it. But there is certainly some value in regards to the look of the movie. It does look cool. There is some fairly good kind of fight choreography. The movie is relatively well paced in regards to its kind of sort of action sequences and things like this. I mean, arguably the humour and stuff, I think, maybe gives it a little bit more of a broader appeal, but it does lose maybe some of the harder edge maybe that the first film had to a certain degree. But I understand why they have A, made it a little bit more comedic, and B, made it English language, which will try and appeal to somewhat of a kind of a wider audience. So that's I guess like positive for some, maybe a negative for others. But it's like, you know, it's a very much a movie where the good guys they're rough and tough, but they are the good guys. The bad guys are, you know, our main bad guy kills a kid and things like this. So you can, you know, he's definitely a guy who you want to see his comeuppance and stuff like that. The movie has some interesting kind of ideas. I don't know if it fully succeeds in implementing them. We'll talk about one in particular in a little bit, but nonetheless, there are some kind of interesting things here. And if you just like a very uncomplicated superhero vigilante movie that is just about cracking heads and action, then you may want to check it out. But what doesn't work, as I said, I mean, I think this movie comes across as being very unsophisticated, but in today's standards. It really does feel like a 90s movie. It's the same thing I said about the first film as well. It's very uncomplicated. The characters are really just caricatures or paper thin kind of characterization. They don't seem particularly kind of realistic. They do seem a little bit hammy and overbaked. Now, the decision here to have this movie effectively be in English, and we have many Finnish actors here speaking in English, makes for some odd performances, I would say. Overall, I think the performances are on the weaker side, but I think it's partially down to the fact that some of the actors here are clearly Finnish actors speaking in a second language, and as such the performances don't really seem particularly natural. I think some of the direction the actors have been given may be a little bit on the kind of the weaker side in regards to what the director is trying to get from his actors. And generally speaking, I think some of the acting is on the poorer side. Now, there are some things here that are introduced that I feel were weird or didn't really make sense. And then I'm going to point out two. Number one, Bruce Payne's character. Now, Bruce Payne is probably the most recognisable actor in this movie. And he is introduced as a kind of another bad guy. But his character, you could take out the film and he would make no impact to the story. And he has very little screen time, really. He's only really in the last act of the movie. But his role is completely redundant. He doesn't need to be there. So he needed to either have something to do or just have that role not in the film. He didn't need to be there. That was the first win. But the other one, I would say, the other odd idea that is in this movie that I don't think is particularly well implemented is, at first, it seems that Rendel is changing sex. He seems to flit between being a man and then a woman. And I think it's meant to be his ex-wife. But you'll just see him, one minute he'll appear as a guy, and then the next minute he'll appear as a woman. But in like a different costume. And I think it's meant to be that he has the spirit of his wife in him or something like that. But it doesn't make sense. Like, why is she in a different costume? Things like this. And it's like, how is she like able to fight? It just doesn't make any sense. She's like fighting in martial arts that was never established. She's got all this kind of weird, like, veiny things going on. It's just one of these things that are just introduced. And while I was watching, I mean, bear in mind there's been quite a big gap between the first and second movie. Why is he turning into a woman all of a sudden? I have a feeling it's because they wanted to have a woman-on-woman fight. But why not just introduce another character? This would have made much more sense to me than having this weird, like, flit between, like, male and female. It was just an odd choice that wasn't really explained. And seemed to kind of come out of nowhere, to be honest. A lot of the same problems I have with the first movie are present in this one. The Rendel character, you know, he's an expert kind of fighter and stuff like that, but he really is, he was a bank teller in the original film. It's like he wasn't like ex-military or anything, so again, we still don't really know how he's so kind of like an efficient killer and things like this. It's a very kind of simple character, it's a very kind of simple story. The dialogue is, I have to be honest with you, somewhat on the hammy side, to put it sort of very kindly. So overall, it's more of the same. As I say, I think the humour seems out of place at times. And I have to be honest with you, although I think it's a very, very comparable movie to the first, even though there is a couple of tonal changes, I've got to be honest with you, I think I'd put this slightly lower than the original movie, purely because there's some decisions that were made in this movie that I feel make less sense than anything in the first film. Although I will say the production value is probably a little higher in this one. But I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. I have to be honest with you, I think it's a very shallow experience. You know, I would look to the Daredevil like Netflix series if they wanted to kind of go a third one and maybe have a little bit more of that kind of sort of style. As it stands at the moment, it feels very much like a relic, this movie. So it's a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.